So, let's talk about Franz Kafka, and specifically about a book he was absolutely passionate about publishing, a book that never ever saw the light of day. He wanted to call it The Sons, and he was convinced that the stories inside were bound together by a secret connection. And today, well, we're going to find that secret. All right, so picture this. It's 1913. Franz Kafka is young, practically unknown, and he writes this letter to his publisher. He's got three stories: The Stoker, The Metamorphosis, and The Judgment. And he says, look, these have to be published together in one book. He tells them, sure, there's an obvious connection, but there's also something more important, a secret one. But, the publisher just didn't get it. Probably saw it as some young, dramatic author's whim. And so the book, The Sons, was never released. Which leaves us with this incredible question that has fascinated people for over a century. What on earth was this secret connection Kafka was so insistent about? To crack this code, we have to start where Kafka told us to start, with that obvious connection. And really, it's hiding in plain sight, right there in the title he wanted. It's all about the main characters. So let's meet our guys, the three sons. You've got George Benjamin, a young merchant. There's Karl Rossmann, a teenager who gets banished from home. And of course, the one everybody knows, Gregor Samsa, the traveling salesman. Now, each story is about one of these young men, but what really ties them together isn't just that they're sons, it's what happens to them. Their bizarre and frankly terrible fates. Take George in The Judgment. Out of absolutely nowhere, his own father sentences him to death by drowning. And here's the truly bizarre part. George just does it. No questions asked. He literally runs from the room, throws himself off a bridge, and as he's falling, he shouts about how much he loves his parents. I mean, what? Then you've got young Karl Rossmann in The Stoker. He gets packed up and shipped off to America. His crime? Being seduced by an older servant. As his uncle says, his parents tossed him out just as you throw a cat out of the house when it annoys you. And yet, despite all this, Karl somehow stays this incredibly naive and innocent kid. And then, of course, there's Gregor Samsa. His story kicks off with one of the most famous opening lines in all of literature. He wakes up as a giant bug. His family, the very people he worked himself to the bone to support, are just horrified, disgusted. And eventually, they reject him completely and just let him die, all alone in his room. So you see the pattern here, right? It's not just the punishments that are so shocking, it's the reaction, or really, their lack of one. George, Karl, Gregor, they all just passively accept these awful fates. There's no rebellion, no anger, no why me, nothing. Gregor is literally thinking of his family with tenderness and love right before he dies. This bizarre acceptance, that's the first layer of the secret. But that kind of passive acceptance, it points to something much bigger, to a force so powerful that the idea of rebellion doesn't even seem possible. To really understand these sons, we have to look at the one casting this giant shadow over all three stories. You see, these stories aren't really about individuals. They're about the family unit, and specifically about the titanic, crushing power of the father figure. This isn't just a personal conflict. It's a generational war where the son is basically doomed from the start. And this theme came straight from Kafka's own life. I mean, when he was writing these stories in 1912, he was 29 years old and still living at home. He felt completely suffocated, even describing his own parents as persecutors. All that personal struggle became the raw material for his fiction. This is where we get to the impossible psychological trap that Kafka saw so clearly. The father figure gives two commands at the exact same time, and they totally contradict each other. On the one hand, it's, become a man, be independent like me. And on the other, it's, stay a child, be grateful and obedient and never leave. It's a classic double bind, a game you can't possibly win. So, if you're the son caught in that trap where adulthood is both demanded and forbidden, what can you do? How do you break free? Well, the answer to that question, that's where we find the true secret connection of the sons. The escape, you see, wasn't in the plots of the stories. The protagonists, we've already seen, they don't escape. The real escape was in the act of writing itself. So how did Kafka escape being the son? By becoming the father. Think about it. In his life, Kafka was the powerless son. But at his desk, pen in hand, he was a god. He was the one in control. He created these son figures, George, Carl, Gregor, and with the absolute power of an author, he decided their tragic fates. By writing their stories of death and banishment, he was able to rise above his own. And this idea of literary paternity wasn't just some clever metaphor for him. It was physical, it was visceral. He described writing The Judgment as coming out of him like a real birth, covered with filth and slime. I mean, wow. He wasn't just composing a story, he was giving birth to it. He was its father. And you see this idea of his stories being his children all over his letters and diaries. He felt like one of his stories his little lad. He felt like every story he finished was another step toward his own adulthood, his own independence. That's why he so desperately needed the sons published, to prove his own legitimacy as a creator, as a man. So there it is. That's the secret connection. The stories were Kafka's attempt to become a father through art, to finally escape being a son in real life. And if you think that's just a theory, well, years later, he made this theme startlingly, painfully explicit. In 1919, Kafka wrote a massive 100-page letter to his dad. It was a complete indictment of his father's parenting. He gave it to his mother to deliver, but she never did. It is, for all intents and purposes, the ultimate son story. In that letter, Kafka just lays it all bare. He flat out admits, "My writing was all about you." He says his entire life's work was basically just him complaining on paper about all the things he could never say to his father's face. It was his long, drawn-out way of leaving a man whose approval he knew he could never win. And just listen to this powerful image from the letter. It just perfectly captures that feeling of being completely suffocated by a parent. He imagines his father stretched out across the entire map of the world. There's no corner to escape to. For Kafka, even things like marriage and having his own kids felt like territories his father had already conquered and made unreachable. And that's the tragedy, really. Despite his literary triumphs, despite figuring all of this out, Kafka never truly escaped in his own life. He never married. He never quite achieved that independence he was searching for. He remained a son, right up until his death from tuberculosis in 1924. He was only 40 years old. And the final, heartbreaking irony is found etched in stone. Kafka was buried back in Prague in the family plot. On the single tombstone that marks his family's grave, his name is inscribed directly above his father's. A permanent, final testament to the identity that defined him, tormented him, and ultimately fueled his genius: the son.